Boldwood presents The Story of Our Secrets, written by Shari Low and read by Helen McAlpine. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue. Colm O'Flynn, August 2016. This isn't going to work. My hands are shaking so much I can't hold the phone still. Change of plan. I rest the phone against the pile of books on my bedside table. The thrillers and crime novels belong to my wife, Shauna, but she brought them in here for me because she hasn't had time to read for months. My fault. My bloody incredible wife of 15 years has been working so hard to make up for the income I've lost that she crashes into a deep sleep within seconds of crawling under the duvet. Another UCOADH, unintentional consequence of a dying husband, especially one who's self-employed in a fairly new company. My business partner and best mate Dan is paying me as much as possible every month, but there's no way one guy can bring in as much as both of us together, no matter how hard he tries. Reduced earnings. An UCOADBP. See what I did there? The last couple of letters are interchangeable, depending on whether the effect is on my role as a husband, a business partner, a dad to our 6-year-old girl, Beth. Sorry, had to stop there. Bloody big lump in my throat. An unintentional consequence of a dying me. 40 years old, and I've barely shed a tear in my gifted life. And now, one wayward thought can have me choking back a tsunami of liquid pain. Not that I'll tell you that, my darling Shauna. We did the whole falling apart thing a while after we got the prognosis that the end was inevitable. I'm not saying imminent. Hopefully, it'll be a while yet. We allowed ourselves a weekend of grief while Beth was having a sleepover with Dan and Lulu. Then we dried our eyes on the Sunday night, 5 minutes before Beth arrived back home, and there's been nothing but relentless cheeriness ever since. Our immediate friends, Dan and Lulu, and Rosie know, but we both agreed not to tell Beth. She's too young, and I don't want her to worry a day in her life. Besides, I don't do bad news. I much prefer denial and avoidance, two of my very favourite things. Shauna is usually more one for straight talking and realism, but she's come over to my side lately. That's what a chap with a doctor delivering a death sentence can do for you. 12 to 18 months. That's the average survival rate for this particular bastard of a brain tumour. Not that I'm accepting that. Nope, that's not happening to me. Although, I guess I'm dropping the denial on a temporary basis, just long enough to make this video for Shauna to watch after I'm... well, you know. I could save myself trying to balance this bollocks and phone if I just told it all to her face now, while I'm still here. But I know she won't listen. She'll brush it off, say she doesn't want to talk about it. I know my darling wife. I knew her inside and out the minute I set eyes on her beautiful face, 15 years ago in a bar on the riverbank in Richmond upon Thames. And that's why I'm lying here, in a hospital a few miles from our home in Richmond, trying to get my head straight enough to tell her everything I need her to hear, while she's out putting in another 14-hour day at work. I'm being unusually yet impressively practical, if I do say so myself. Brainwave. I lift a Michael Connelly novel the size of a Hovis loaf from the top of the pile and put it in front of the phone to stop it sliding down. Bingo. The brain might be under siege from this bastard tumour, but it still conjures up the occasional moment of inspiration. That's how the idea to do this thing with the phone came about. Years ago, long before the first headache led to so much more, Shauna persuaded me, I think there was emotional blackmail or bribery involved, to watch one of those rom-com movies she likes. I'm not a fan. They always end up marrying the bloke who was their best friend and secretly in love with them all along. Anyway, despite the fact that there was football on the other channel, I gave in. We ended up watching that movie... what's it called? The one where Gerard Butler has an Irish accent and a brain tumour, and he sends letters to his missus, Hilary Swank. P.S. I love you. That's it. Really bad choice in hindsight. There's a dose of sick irony if ever I saw one. Life imitating art here. Anyway, when the movie finished, she binned the half a box of tissues she'd gone through in the sad bits. Then we went to bed, made love, and afterwards... Please don't judge me, I swear I was joking. I looked into her gorgeous green eyes, brushed back a lock of her blonde hair and whispered, "If that was me in that movie, I'd have finished those letters differently." She grinned that gorgeous, sexy, irresistible smile. "Oh yeah? And what would you say, Colm O'Flynn?" I put on my best serious face. Something more profound, more spiritual, something that only you and I would know. She waited as I paused, then went on. "I was thinking, P.S. I love that you're a smashing shag." She scalped me with a pillow, but she laughed until I hushed her with a kiss that lasted until we were ready to love each other again. God, I adore her. I haven't always shown it. I've been a pretty shit husband at times, I admit, but I've always loved her. I still find it fucking miraculous that she loves me too. And that's why I owe her this. I plump up the pillow and wedge it under my head, feeling that familiar tug as the scar across the back of my scalp stretches. I stare at the ceiling for a few minutes, looking for inspiration. None there. Surgery, followed by months of chemo and radiation therapy, has officially wiped out any imagination I ever had, but it hasn't wiped out my burning need to get this done. Okay, let's do it. I still haven't worked out what to say. I've just got a list of headlines, and I was planning to make the rest of it up as I go along. Not exactly a shocker. That's pretty much how I've lived my life. Dan and I own a management consultancy, and when you think about it, I've got a cheek advising people in how to organise and manage their business, considering I haven't organised or managed anything in my own life for, let's go for honesty and say forever. I roll on my side, reach over and press record on the iPhone. "Hey, my darling," I say, as always. It's how I start every day, every call, every conversation. I feel a catch in my throat, and I swallow it back. Not doing the sad thing, no way. There will be enough of that later. This needs to be happy, to be positive, to make her smile. I force a grin and some levity into my voice and go on. "So, I was thinking that we should probably have a chat about some stuff. I know what you're thinking. Wow, my husband is sexy. And look at him lying there in bed like some kind of drop-dead gorgeous hunk in an aftershave advert. But try to focus on what I'm saying." When she watches that bit, she'll shake her head, she'll roll her eyes and whisper that I'm a fool. But we both know she'll laugh too. What's the chances that someone as beautiful and funny and feckin' brilliant as Shauna would find my lame line in chat amusing too? It's up there with all that loaves, fishes and walking on water stuff. The thing is, my darling, we both know what's coming. You've been refusing to discuss it and, well, we both know that denial is one of my superpowers. No one wins a coconut for guessing that I don't want to give a single day of what's left to talking about what will happen down the road. But we have to, love. I'm planning to tell you what's on here at the last possible minute, so I know I won't be around when you watch it. You might want to get a coffee and get comfortable because this will take a while, and I can't promise I won't ramble on or insert inappropriate jokes to break the tension. I can't have you keeling over with dehydration when I finally find the courage to get to bits that matter. Just in case, let me start with the good stuff. Shauna O'Flynn, I've adored you every day of my life. Even when I've been a daft prick or an insensitive arse. You're everything. You always were. And if I had the choice of living these 15 years with you or 50 years with someone else, I'd choose you in every lifetime. But this isn't forever, Shauna. We both know that. So I've got some stuff to tell you. About the past, about now, but mostly about after I'm gone. You know I don't believe in all that watching over you stuff. And yep, I'll feel like a complete idiot if it turns out I get a ringside seat to the future. That's why I need you to know my hopes for the lives you and Beth will have without me. I need to know that you'll take care of the people I love. And I need to ask your forgiveness for... The words get stuck somewhere between my heart and my mouth. I can't open with that. If I do, she might never watch another minute, and this will all be wasted. I swerve and change tack. Actually, I'll come to that one later, my darling. I've got a whole load of other stuff to get through first. Let me start with a few messages that I need you to pass on for me. Okay, here goes. Chapter 1. Shauna O'Flynn, May 2021. Friday night, 9 o'clock. I was pretty sure that I was setting a giddy new level on the Sado scale. I've been sitting on the floor of the utility room watching my washing go round since the 10-minute pre-wash, through the soapy stuff, and at least 2 rinses. The glass of Prosecco that was on the tile floor beside me began to vibrate, and I knew from experience that we were about to switch it up to the heady excitement of the spin cycle. Yes, I'd been here before. More times than I could count or wanted to admit. Tonight didn't feel any better, or any worse than the others. Okay, maybe slightly worse. I'd been feeding organic chicken goujons and mini hamburgers, 100% beef, gluten-free buns, to 40 kids at a 6-year-old's birthday party in Chiswick this afternoon when, sometime in between little Araminta smacking little Camilla in the face with a dairy and gluten-free cupcake from the dessert tray, and little Theobald throwing an almighty hissy fit because he didn't get an iPhone 12 in his gargantuan mountain of gifts, I realised today's date. It's 25th of May, 2021, which makes today exactly 20 years since I was in a bar in the riverbank in Richmond-upon-Thames, and Colm O'Flynn walked in. 5 minutes later and I'd have missed him, and my whole life would have been oh so different. I could still see that night so vividly. I was there with my closest friends back then, Lulu, Rosie and Vincent, celebrating the launch of Vincent's new catering company. Rosie? Wow, I hadn't thought about her for ages. She lives in New Zealand now, after going over there a couple of years ago to meet a farmer she'd hooked up with online. Her occasional emails told me she was loving life, and I was happy for her. Our friendship had fractured long before that, when I discovered that despite a 24-year age difference, she was in a relationship with my dad in the years before his death in 2016. That would never stop being a shocker. Afterwards, though, we'd stuck a patch on the wound and found a way to live with it, but now it was a closed chapter that I chose not to reopen. Back in 2001, though, we were oblivious to what else life had in store for us. As we knocked back a few cocktails, we had no idea that one day Vincent and I would merge our companies and become partners, and that we'd have a spectacular fallout that would end with him leaving the country. I could never have predicted what the future held for Lulu, and I had no clue that just as I was about to leave and head home, Lulu's boyfriend Dan would arrive and his best mate Colm, the love of my life, would walk in behind him. Actually, it was more of a swagger. Colm had this walk that made you smile, a kind of casual, easy-going physicality that was matched by the twinkle in his eye and his easy grin. He was the kind of guy that wore his goodness on the outside, and that, combined with a couple of deadly one-liners, a self-deprecating humour and the sexiest Irish burr I'd ever heard, caused something in my head and my heart to explode. When the bar closed, he walked me across Richmond Bridge to my flat on the Twickenham side of the river, and I heard myself asking him in for coffee, this stranger that I felt I'd known forever. We sat on my tired old balcony until the sun came up, watching the flickering lights in the sky of the planes stacking in the airspace above Heathrow. Sometime in those hours, I fell in love. I also sustained a large bruise on my left buttock, thanks to the combination of an enthusiastic smooch and a collapsing balcony chair, but his laughter made the pain, and the chiropractor's bill, easier to bear. My eyes closed as I rested my head on the wall behind me, the throb of the spin cycle blocked out by my focus on bringing the memory of his face to the front of my mind. For a while after he died, there would be days that I'd fall apart because I couldn't seem to remember what he looked like. How ridiculous was that? The man I was with for 15 years, the father of my child, the love of my life, and I was devastatingly sure that I couldn't pick him out in a lineup. It's hard to say when that passed. Now, 5 years after he left us, I can see him clearly. I can even hear his voice, and sometimes I'm sure I can feel him around me. At least, that's what I choose to believe. I'm not sure if that makes me miss him more or less. It helps that even though she's only 11, Beth already looks so like him. The same green eyes and hair the shade of walnuts, the same smile, wide and quick, and a laugh that is so contagious it makes you forget that you're knackered, stressed, or ready to hunt down the driver who dented your car door in the Tesco's car park. Although, if you're the driver of the blue Volvo who left a ruddy great big dent on a van with my company logo, Constant Cravings, on the side, be afraid, because I will find you. The sudden realization that the door beside me was opening startled me. Beth was at a sleepover at my mother's house this weekend, so as far as I knew, I was alone. This was it. I was about to be murdered in my own home by an intruder, and my soapy knickers would languish in the washing machine until someone found my body. You know there's a box on the wall in the living room that shows far more interesting stuff than your clothes going round. It's called a TV. There's also a thing called a sofa, which is far more comfortable for a woman of your advancing years. Every minute on that floor is a minute closer to a hip replacement. Not a burglar, but close. A home invader with a pretty decent line in sarcasm. Jess O'Flynn, my late husband's first wife, reached the wall I was leaning against and slid down it, joining me on charcoal tiles. Jess held out a bottle of Budweiser, but I shook my head and gestured to the Prosecco on the other side of me. As I did, I realised it was empty and revised my answer, taking the beer. It saved my allegedly crumbling hips from getting up and taking me through to the kitchen for a refill. She nudged my shoulder with hers. So, want to tell me why you're sitting here drinking plonk while staring at your washing machine? Or is this some kind of weird fetish thing? My name is Shauna, and I get off on soapy bubbles, she teased, doing a breathy, sexy thing when she was mimicking me. Is your safe word Ariel or Daz? That would usually make me laugh, but not tonight. I really need to take your key off you. I only gave it to you because I was hoping you'd come in and fill my fridge while I was at work. Her auburn, chin-length bob quivered as she shrugged her shoulders. You can tell yourself that, but we both know it's because I'm a free babysitting service. That's also true, I agreed, deadpan. All part of the shared husband's ex-wife service? She quipped, before taking a slug of her beer and nudging me again. Go on, admit I'm the best ex-wife in a codependent blended family that you've ever had. It took a bit of effort to shrug off my sadness, but I'd had plenty of practice at masking the hollowed-out canyon in the pit of my stomach. And let's face it, she was right. 20 years ago today, I met Colm, which was approximately 1 month after his divorce from Jess was finalised. During the next decade and a half, Jess and I rubbed along in polite civility, mostly, if I'm honest, for the sake of their twins, Davy and Joe, who were 4 when we met. Later, after Beth was born, we did a few blended family Christmases and birthdays, but it was only after Colm got sick that we became friends, despite a couple of revelations about their relationship that I've compartmentalised into a big box with a "Do Not Open" sticker on the top. Since we lost him, I think we've surprised ourselves by becoming close, and now she's like the sister I never had, the older, cooler one who frequently turns up uninvited, regularly acts like the boss of me, but who I can always count on in times of crisis and child-minding. I gave up trying to resist her attempts to distract me from my rare but heartfelt moment of self-pity. Okay, you're the best ex-wife in a codependent blended family that I've ever had. She made a touchdown gesture. Yes! A pause. But you still haven't told me why you're sitting here. I realised this is the 20th anniversary of the night I met Colm. That gave her a moment of pause. I should have known it was around now. Because it was 20 years last month since you got divorced? I filled in the blanks. Her sad smile as she nodded told me I was right. Both of us sat there with that for a minute. I cracked first. "What are we like?" I sighed, putting my head on her shoulder. "Pathetic, sad, but aging well and gorgeous on the inside?" Jess offered, her wit restored, but her words lacking her usual enthusiasm. I couldn't remember the last time I cried over losing Colm, and the tears didn't come now either. It was more of a numbness, an emptiness where a whole stack of emotions, joy, attraction, passion, excitement, and even lust, used to be. I just miss him. I felt her rest her chin on the top of my head. "I know, hun. I do too. Not that I'm trying to steal your thunder or make this all about me. I'm his ex-wife. I'm not Lulu," she said, getting a playful dig in about my lifelong best friend. Even Lulu wouldn't have argued with her. Being completely self-absorbed was one of the qualities Lulu put on those surveys that asked for your biggest strengths. "I invented self-love before it was a thing," she'd say proudly, before going off to do as she damn well pleased. Jess's barb made the corners of my lips turn up. Down deep, way deep in their hearts, Jess and Lulu loved each other, but they clashed and both seemed to absolutely relish opportunities to wind the other one up. Most of the time, I wasn't sure if I was a friend or a referee. I just got a flashback to Colm standing in my kitchen, telling me that he'd met you. Can't believe that was 20 years ago. You'd only been going out for a few weeks and I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing. I still had some slices of my divorce cake in the freezer and he'd already met someone new and had decided to marry her. I'd already met Steve, so it wasn't that I was jealous of the relationship, but I was definitely pissed off that he was getting married so quickly. I'd been hoping that he'd find it impossible to do the till death do us part stuff for years after our divorce, or at least until I married Ben Affleck. This wasn't news. Years ago, not long after Colm passed away, she'd confessed that she'd felt that way at the start of our relationship. "You're a really terrible person, you know," I told her. "But a great babysitter," she pointed out hopefully. "True. I forgive you. Anyway, Karma bit me on the arse. A few weeks later you were married. I mean, who does that? Who gets married that quickly?" "We did." It was a totally unnecessary answer, but sometimes I just like to say it out loud, to remind myself of the thunderbolt that was my husband. 6 weeks after we met, Colm asked me to marry him and we tied the knot a few weeks later. Not once did I have a second of hesitation or doubt. I knew. He knew. At least at the start. It wouldn't always be that way. It wasn't always the fairy tale I thought it was going to be. I squashed that thought and stuck with the happy memories. 3 months. That was how long it took to completely change my life, my future, everything. And now, I struggled to finish the thought. He's been gone for 5 years, and I still think he's going to walk in the door, Jess. When is this going to get better? My head was still on Jess's shoulder, but I could tell she was thinking about what I said because I could hear her heart thudding. Or that might have been my pipes. This building was gorgeous but ancient. Jess's dramatic sigh made her hair flutter. "Okay, Shauna. Do you want me to tell you what I really think, or just stick with clichés and platitudes?" I didn't hesitate. "Clichés and platitudes." That made her laugh. "Well, tough. Because I've been thinking about this for a while and waiting for the right moment to talk to you. I've just done a whole module on grief, and it's made me realise a few things." Jess was almost done with her master's in psychology. Since she left university with a social science degree, Jess had worked in both teaching and recruitment, but now she'd decided to retrain and become a life coach. I had a feeling I was about to become her guinea pig, and I stifled a groan. This didn't sound like it was going to be a light, breezy conversation. She wasn't going to tell me some piece of witty gossip or about a 20% off sale on ASOS. Jess and I hadn't had a deep and meaningful conversation for years, and to be honest, that kept me sane. Superficiality and forced cheer had been my two best friends since I buried my husband. For the first time, I really did wish that I hadn't given her a key. Jess, don't. Sorry, Shauna, but this comes from a place of love. You need to move on. You need to start living again. It's been 5 years. You can't spend the next 5 years shut down like this, just surviving, getting through the days. There was no point arguing with what she'd just said because she was accurately describing my life. Do you want to know what I think will help? She murmured. Could I stop you telling me? Only if you magically pull some gaffer tape out of that ironing basket and apply it to my gob, she retorted. I knew when I was beat. Go on then. I closed my eyes and waited for Jess to dole out her words of wisdom. Whatever she had to say would no doubt be honest and heartfelt, but that didn't mean I wanted to hear it. Jess took a breath. Okay, you're not going to like this, but I think that... That was as far as she got before the phone lying on the floor next to me began to ring. I felt her head lifting off mine as we both checked the screen. Lulu. Jess rolled her eyes. Bloody hell. She's thousands of miles away and she's still managing to make this moment all about her. Grateful for the reprieve, I answered the call and put it on speaker. Hey! Shouldn't you be lying on a beach in the Maldives drinking a pina colada while your shiny new husband rubs sun cream on your buttocks? I'm doing that too. I can multitask, Lulu fired back. Shall we chat about your history of doing two things at once? Jess interjected cheekily. The statement was loaded, and I could envisage Lulu's eyes narrowing as she tossed back her wild mane of red corkscrew curls, preparing for battle. Lulu's current and very new marriage to property mogul Bobby Jones was the result of a relationship she'd started while still married to Dan. My teeth clenched as I prepared for Lulu to go full predator and annihilate Jess. But, to my surprise, she giggled. And Lulu didn't do giggling. Either she was a few cocktails in, or Bobby had a superpower that allowed him to defrost the icy edge on my best friend's personality. Ah, is that Jess? The one who hasn't had a life since about 2012? Must be great up there on your moral high ground, but I much prefer the view down here in a cabana on the edge of the Indian Ocean. And there she was, my shameless, smart-mouthed pal. This time it was Jess who hooted with laughter. I just shook my head. Ribbing each other was like a blood sport for these two, and they both seemed to derive such twisted amusement from it. I really needed to find a softer pal, someone who was sweetness and light and had a circle of butterflies above her head when she woke up in the morning. Or Dolly Parton. She would definitely lighten my day. Lulu cut back to the point. Anyway, what are you two doing right now? Sitting on the floor of the utility room feeling sorry for myself. Jess brought beer, and I've dragged her down to my level, I admitted, knowing that Lulu could picture the scene perfectly, because she'd been in here countless times. Dan owned the building I lived in, and Lulu had lived here with him until their marriage crumbled. He still occupied the bottom 2 floors, while Beth and I lived on the level above him. Jess spoke up. Yeah, come home. It's going to take 2 of us to get her off the floor. Oh, honey, Lulu said softly, and I knew that was directed at me. Your heart hurts because today is 20 years since you met Colm. That shocked me silent for a few seconds. Lulu was rarely aware of much that was going on in anyone else's life, except Beth. When it came to my daughter, she was all over it, making sure that she felt loved and secure and seen. It was like she'd taken all the angst and dysfunction of our teenage years growing up together, flipped them upside down, and channeled the result into a blueprint for raising a happy, grounded, secure, loved child. Say whatever you wanted about Lulu Jones, and many did, but she was an incredible godmother to my child. And she never failed to surprise. How did you know that? I asked, so touched she'd remembered something so important to my life. Because that was the first night I hooked up with Jake. The Australian bloke who worked the bar, and it was my birthday. I ended up seeing him on and off for years. For some reason, the date always stuck in my mind. Ah, right then. What she failed to mention was that her boyfriend at the time, the lovely Dan, arrived while she was outside hooking up with the Australian bloke, and I had to keep him talking for an excruciating 20 minutes while making excuses for her. I think I said she was taking ages in the loo because she had cystitis. I know it would be easy to hate Lulu. Her principles are dodgy and she's unapologetically wild. But I understand her. I know where all that comes from. I sighed. Good to know. So now that you've crushed Jess's ego and crapped all over my sacred memories, was there a reason for this call? I need the two of you to get off the floor and go downstairs and check on Dan. I'm worried about him. Like I said, she never failed to surprise. Jess pointed out the obvious. Dan, your ex-husband, the one you left and divorced so you could marry a bloke with a Lamborghini and blonde highlights. Yes, and they're not highlights, that's his natural hair. Yeah, well, Rod Stewart wants it back, Jess drawled. I stuck to the important stuff. Why are you worried about him? Dan had been Colm's best mate for most of their adult lives. They worked together, played together, and shared almost every important moment. He was like the brother I never had, and without him I'd never have met Colm. I didn't get in the middle of his relationship with Lulu, but I'd been gutted when they split. Now I walked a tightrope between them, caught in the middle of two of my favourite people in the world. Because he's not answering his phone. Probably because you're his ex-wife and you're on your honeymoon with your new husband, Jess suggested unhelpfully. Lulu ignored her and carried on explaining her concerns. And that's not like him. You know we've managed to keep things amicable, and we speak most days. But yesterday and today there's been no answer. I've got visions of him lying in a pool of alcohol, having choked on the last remnants of edible food in the cupboard. If he dies thanks to a jar of olives that's been there since 2018, I'll never forgive myself. I'm sure he's fine, I assured her, racking my brain to pinpoint the last time I'd spoken to Dan. Was it yesterday? I ran through the day in my head. No, it was the day before, because we were still hungover from Lulu's wedding. He'd called to cancel lunch, citing an aching head due to overindulgence of fine wines and champagne at the nuptials. It had been a spectacular affair at Cliveden House, the stately home that had once been the residence of generations of the Astor family. It was an apt choice, given that it was originally built by a duke to house his mistress, and then was a pivotal location in the Profumo affair, the scandal that rocked the British government in the 60s. Just Lulu's kind of place. Some people might find it odd that Dan was invited, but as Lulu said, they'd kept things amicable, and up until last week, Lulu still worked for Comp Consultants, the company Dan and Colm found, and that Dan had continued to run after he lost his best mate and partner. I knew it would take more than words to reassure Lulu, so I added, but I'll pop down and check on him. I'll come too, in case the olives got him. I'm fully trained in the Heimlich manoeuvre, Jess said. I flicked her arm. She wasn't taking this seriously at all. Thanks, Shauna. Will you drop me a text and let me know he's okay? Bobby and I are just about to go out to a club, so I might not hear my phone if you ring. I calculated the time difference and realised it was now close to midnight over there. Lulu had always been the queen of stamina. I pushed myself up off the floor. Sure will, but I'm sure he's fine. You know, Lou... I paused. Sentimentality wasn't Lulu's thing, but I decided to forge on with my thought anyway. I miss you. Yeah, I miss you too. I was feeling warm and bubbly until she added, Christ, would you listen to me? I think I must have sunstroke. Bye, Shauna. Bye, Satan. It's Miss Satan to you, Jess quipped back, earning another giggle before the click of the call ending. I reached down, took Jess's hand and pulled her up. It wasn't difficult. Since the day I met her almost 20 years ago, she'd never varied from a size 10. That's what daily yoga and a 5K run every morning did for you. I was a size 14. That's what 20 years of talking about taking up yoga and running but not actually doing it did for you. Right, come on then. Let's go downstairs and pay a visit to the Lonely Hearts Club and check Dan's okay. And then, when we come back up here, I'll wallow in sadness and loss for a while longer. Then we can finish the conversation where you were about to tell me how to fix my life. Or we could just watch senseless reality TV until we're numb. I think I prefer option 2. Jess flashed her perfect white teeth. I'll give you one more night of moping. Let's eat popcorn, drink beer and watch a chick flick. A high-grade snot one that will make us cry our eyes out and get all the sadness out of our system. How about that one with Jerry Butler? The one where he pops his clogs. She wouldn't be winning any prizes for sentimentality. P.S. I love you? That's it! Jess exclaimed. I love that film. It's a 3-box of tissues and swollen eyes for 2 days kind of movie. If we're going to be sad, let's do it with a bit of Jerry Butler. Hadn't I just been thinking about that movie? Sometimes it felt like the universe was telling me exactly what I needed. Sounds like a plan, I agreed, smiling at the memory of my darling husband's horrified reaction when I coaxed him into watching it 1,000,000 years ago. If he was looking down on us now, his wife and his ex-wife planning a night in with a sobathon, featuring a heartthrob with an Irish accent, he'd be shaking his head as he grabbed his jacket and sought refuge in the Pearly Gates pub. As we headed for the door, I wondered if the noise I could hear was the washing machine or Colm spinning in his grave. Chapter 2. Shauna. It took seconds to descend the stone stairs and reach the dark carved mahogany and stained glass of Dan's door on the ground floor. Dan had inherited the gorgeous 3-story Georgian townhouse on Richmond Green from his uncle when he was in his early 20s. Over time, he and Lulu had converted the 2 lower floors into a stunning duplex apartment. After Colm died, I'd sold our home and rented the 3rd floor, which Dan had refurbished and turned into a 3-bedroom flat for Beth and me. I'd never regretted the move. Our old house had a big mortgage, an unruly garden, and way too many memories, both good and bad. Living here gave me the security of my closest friends downstairs, until Lulu upped and left Dan for Bobby, handy childcare, and a family atmosphere for Beth to grow up in. I knocked on the door and waited. And waited. Jess was leaning against the wall of the hallway, eyebrows raised expectantly. Don't you have a key? She asked. I do, but I don't like using it unless I know for sure that it's a good time. For all we know, Dan could be in there on day 2 of a sex marathon with a new girlfriend. How would it look if 2 women burst in, demanding to know why he wasn't answering his phone? That's a passion killer right there. Even if we bring beer? Jess asked, holding up the 4-pack of Budweiser she'd grabbed on the way down. Fair point. I could swing it. I shrugged as I knocked again. Nothing. Jess filled the gap. If this was a cop show, one of us would kick the door down and we'd run in and find him passed out on the floor, and I'd throw myself on him and give him CPR and save his life. Why do you get to save his life? I asked. Why can't I save his life? Today is the anniversary of meeting my dead husband. Surely I should get the glory moment. I know, completely inappropriate. But Jess and I had used gallows humour to get us through pretty much every day of the last 5 years, and it was a force of habit now. She sighed. Suppose so. But if there is a burglar or violent criminal in there, I get to tackle them to the ground and knock them out with a handily placed heavy object. Deal. I agreed reluctantly, as if I was making some major concession on a global arms negotiation. I banged on the door again, louder this time, then waited a few more seconds. Nothing. Maybe you should forget the whole privacy thing and go get the key, Jess suggested. If he's in the middle of orgasmic sex, we'll avert our eyes. Actually, it's been so long, I'm not sure I'd recognise it. I ran back upstairs, grabbed the key and was back down, a little breathless, in seconds, trying to push down the triffids of anxiety that were beginning to creep around my gut. Everything was fine. Dan was great. Hadn't he told me that 100 times? Hadn't he sworn he was over Lulu and wished her well? Hadn't he vowed to move on and build a new life on his own terms? He was probably out right now shooting tequila with a date, or at the gym, or hiding behind the sofa because he knew 2 women who were sitting on the floor of a utility room 10 minutes ago were about to descend on him. After glancing at Jess and getting a nod of encouragement, I put the key in the door and pushed it open. Silence. "Can't hear an RJ," Jess observed unhelpfully. "He must be out. Or away." Yep, that was it. He'd gone off somewhere for the weekend. Jess wasn't convinced. "Wouldn't he have told you?" Good point. Of course he would have. Out on a date, then? Maybe he wouldn't have shared that info with me. We were as close as siblings, but that didn't mean he had to give me a heads up about every romantic encounter, and to be honest, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. As I pondered this, Jess gave me a not-so-subtle shove, propelling me forward to the end of the short hallway. Ignoring my hiss of objection, she nodded more encouragement as I tentatively opened the door to the open-plan living, dining, kitchen area, a gorgeous white-walled space with herringbone oak floors and glass doors spanning the full length of the wall out to the garden. Lulu had updated the kitchen the year before, swapping out the gleaming white gloss units for matte black cabinets with bronze handles and white quartz worktops. The oversized copper drop pendants above the massive island and the wood and metal bar stools gave the place an industrial edge that was softened by the welcoming vibe of the live-edged oak dining table that separated the kitchen from the huge white leather sofa in the lounge area. The times we'd had at that table. For almost 20 years, every decision, every event, every drama had been discussed around that huge slab of well-worn but utterly beautiful wood. That's not where my eyes were now, though. They were transfixed on the top of the kitchen island, on the countless empty beer bottles and used plates that were piled there. This wasn't normal. Dan was usually fastidiously tidy, and the place was always pristine. "Bloody hell. It looks like there's been a rave in here," Jess whistled. "I'm just gutted we weren't invited." I was already over at the bottom of the stairs. "Dan, are you up there?" I didn't expect an answer. Surely if he was in, he'd have answered the door. "Dan!" I tried again. At first, I didn't recognize the noise as human. It was a low hum, that then morphed into a groan, then a mumble, then a raspy cough. My gaze shot round to the other side of the room and fell on the back of the U-shaped sofa which faced the TV on the furthest wall. There, inch by inch, a head was emerging from the seating area of the couch. "Shauna?" The voice was that of an 80-year-old man who'd been on 40 cigarettes a day since he was a lad. The hair looked like a straw bale that had been through a wind turbine. And the face, that was Dan's. Or at least what I reckoned Dan would look like 20 years from now, after being stuck in a desert storm that sucked every drop of hydration out of his pores. "Dear God, tell me you're Dan's granddad," Jess blurted, as more of dishevelled Dan appeared over the top of the sofa. "Nope, Dan's granddad ran a marathon last weekend, and he's dating someone half his age. He's in much better nick than this one," I countered, gesturing to the creature from the white sofa. I went straight into Grey's Anatomy mode, heading into the kitchen area to prepare urgent medical supplies. Aspirin, water, strong coffee, and a barge pole to keep Dan at least 5 meters away until he'd had a shower and burned his clothes. Why was there never a hazmat suit around when I needed one? This was the question I was pondering on the inside. On the outside, my focus was elsewhere, as I took in the full vision of the man who was now standing in front of the couch. The tuxedo trousers, the white wing-collar shirt, the cufflinks at his wrists. "Is that the outfit you wore to Lulu's wedding?" "Oh, Dan." A wave of sadness and guilt killed my words, and I paused for a moment, trying to cover up my reaction by fighting with the buttons on the coffee machine. No one else spoke. Even Jess was uncharacteristically quiet, so I knew I had to finish my thought. The coffee machine burst into life, wiping out my delay tactic. "That was 3 days ago. Why didn't you give me a call? Or a text? Or knock on the ceiling? I had no idea you were down here drowning your sorrows." He began unbuttoning his shirt, then slipped it off and ran his fingers through his hair, calming it down from the Clash circa 1982 to Duran Duran in the Rio years. That was all it took. After a 3-day bender, I'd have needed a week at a spa and a professional makeover to bring myself back to something recognisably human. Dan made a couple of minor adjustments and went straight from Swamp Man to the month of June in a hot builder's calendar. Jess noticed, and continued being the unhelpful gift that kept on giving. "Did you spray paint those abs on?" she asked, taking in his naked torso a tad too intensely. "Surely this should have been enough to stop Lulu leaving for Rod Stewart." Sometimes I forgot that she'd known Dan for much longer than I had. He'd been Colm's best mate since the early days of their marriage, and even after Colm remarried, Jess and Dan had managed to maintain a friendship that was more distant, but just as deep. That made Dan attempt to laugh, which I suspect was the point. "I know, I must have a really shit personality to cancel out these bad boys," he said with a rueful smile, his voice still raspy. A piece of my heart chipped off. He was one of the best people in this earth. Bloody Lulu and her fickle bloody ways. Dan didn't deserve to be tossed aside by his partner of over 2 decades, but he did deserve friends who could keep him company in his swamp. I switched into boss mode. "Right, you go and get a shower and don't come back until you're peachy fresh, and Jess and I will sort this lot out." "We will." She didn't look thrilled, but then she caught my expression and changed her tune. "We will," she repeated more forcefully, pushing her sleeves up and joining me in the kitchen. Dishevelled Dan managed a sad smile. "How did I manage to get rid of one bossy woman and gain 2 new ones?" "This isn't the level of gratitude we expect, Dan Channing," I chided playfully, desperate to lighten the mood. "Now go. And bring those abs back when they're clean and shiny," Jess joked. At least, I think she was joking. We waited until he'd headed upstairs to the shower before I met Jess's doleful gaze with one of my own. "We're rubbish, pals," I began. I had no idea. I was so wrapped up in my own stuff. Jess swatted the air. "Look, it's not your fault, or mine. This is how Dan has chosen to react, and that's his right. The important thing is that we're here now, and we've got rubber gloves and disinfectant," she added, pulling a pair of marigolds from under the sink. We worked in silence and small talk for the next half hour, cleaning counters, loading the dishwasher, filling a black bin bag with the rubbish and loading bottles into the glass recycling tub outside. The whole time, my shoulders were slumped with sadness. A year ago, I wouldn't have predicted this. Even then, despite many splits and reunions, wandering eyes, mostly Lulu's, and on several occasions, I'd really thought Dan and Lulu were just one of those couples that thrived on drama and discord, but would last forever. Wishful thinking. Lulu had met Bobby Jones when she went along to a networking event for high flyers in the property sector, hoping to pitch comp consultants to some of the larger enterprises. Instead, over a lunch of salmon and truffle linguine, she'd pitched herself to the multimillionaire sitting next to her. Bobby Jones, the famously private, fabulously wealthy East End boy made good. This time she didn't just have a harmless flirtation, or even the kind of brief, meaningless fling that she'd succumbed to a few times in the past. Oh no. This time she bloody well fell in love and left the bloke who was now upstairs trying to wash off 3 days of grime in a thick layer of devastation. Within a month of meeting Bobby, she'd left Dan. Within 6 months, she'd divorced him. And within 10 months, she'd marched up the aisle and said another round of I-dos. A whirlwind romance that was more of a tornado, leaving a path of destruction in its wake. And as usual, both emotionally and physically, I was on clear-up. We'd just given the floor a mop when Dan reappeared, bearing no resemblance whatsoever to the man who'd emerged from the depths of the couch. He'd shaved, so the angles of his jaw were back on full view. His hair had been grey now for a couple of years. It had always been a standing joke that